The night was heavy with rain, the kind that made the streets shine like black glass. Daniel sat alone in his small apartment on the edge of the city, the hum of the neon signs outside flickering through the cracked window. He had just finished another long shift as a janitor at the academy, his clothes still carrying the faint smell of bleach and dust. He wanted nothing more than to sit in silence, eat something simple, and let the storm drown out the noise of the world. But then came the knock. It was soft at first, so soft that Daniel thought it was only the sound of raindrops striking metal. He ignored it, stretching his tired legs on the old couch. But the knock came again, louder this time, firm enough to make him lift his head. Daniel frowned. Nobody ever visited him, not at this hour, not in this part of the city. Cautious, he stood and walked toward the door. His hand hovered near the lock. He thought about ignoring it, but something inside told him he couldn't. The third knock came, steady and strange. Daniel finally opened the door. A figure stood in the rain, cloaked in shadows. The neon light spilled across her face, revealing pale silver skin that shimmered even under the storm. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly, and her hair stuck to her cheeks like threads of dark silk. She looked fragile, like she might collapse any moment. Her lips moved, barely a whisper over the roar of the rain. "I can serve, I can stay, I can be silent." Daniel froze, his breath caught. He had heard of aliens before, seen them from a distance, working under strict rules, always watched by enforcers, but never had one come to his door, never spoken to him in the middle of the night. The girl swayed, her thin clothes soaked, water dripping onto the floor. She looked at him with desperate eyes, eyes that pleaded for something more than shelter. Daniel's hand tightened on the doorframe. He knew trouble the moment he saw her. Anyone connected to aliens was marked, hunted, or punished. But she whispered again, softer now, like a promise and a plea at the same time. "I can serve, I can stay, I can be silent." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. He could hear the city outside, the low rumble of passing drones, the hiss of water rushing into the gutters. His heart pounded. He thought of closing the door, locking it, pretending nothing had happened. But then he saw the faint glowing marks on her arms, almost hidden under the wet cloth. They weren't tattoos. They looked like scars burned into her skin, marks of control. Something inside Daniel shifted. He had spent years cleaning up after others, invisible in the academy halls, invisible in his own life. Now, standing in his doorway was someone even more unseen, someone begging to simply exist. He stepped aside slowly, his voice rough. "Come in." The girl hesitated, her body trembling. Then she crossed the threshold, her wet feet leaving faint prints on the cracked tiles. Daniel shut the door behind her, the sound of the lock echoing louder than usual. Inside, the room was warm compared to the storm outside. The girl stood still, not moving, like she feared she had already asked for too much. Daniel fetched an old towel, awkwardly handing it to her. She took it with both hands, bowing her head slightly as if the small kindness was more than she deserved. "What's your name?" Daniel asked quietly. She opened her mouth but stopped. Her eyes darted to the window, then back to him. Her silence was heavy. Daniel didn't push. Instead, he placed a plate of bread and leftovers on the table. The smell of food filled the room. She hesitated again, then stepped closer, her movements careful. She picked at the bread like she had forgotten how to eat. Daniel watched her. His mind spun with questions. Who was she running from? Why here? Why him? But for now, he only knew one thing. The storm outside was less dangerous than the storm that had just stepped into his home. As she ate in silence, Daniel noticed the faint glow of her marks again. They pulsed with a weak light, fading and returning like a heartbeat. He wondered what kind of pain made her whisper those words. "I can serve. I can stay. I can be silent." The night stretched on, the rain never stopping. Outside, Daniel thought he heard something. Footsteps, slow and heavy, moving down the street. He glanced at the door, his chest tightening. Whoever this girl was, she was not alone. Something was following her. Something would come looking. Daniel didn't know it yet. But the moment he opened the door, his world had already changed forever. The small apartment felt different now. Daniel could hear the storm outside, but it no longer sounded the same. The presence of the alien girl filled the silence like a shadow that stretched into every corner. She sat at the edge of the chair, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees, still holding the towel he had given her. Her eyes moved slowly. Across the room, watching everything but saying nothing, Daniel leaned against the wall, unsure what to do. He had never been good with words, never been good with strangers, and now here was someone not even from his world. His heart still beat fast from the moment he had opened the door. "Do you need anything else?" he asked carefully. His voice felt too loud in the small space. The girl shook her head. Her wet hair dripping onto the floor, she whispered again, barely moving her lips. "I can be silent." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I can see that," he muttered under his breath. He placed an old blanket on the back of the chair near her. She didn't touch it. Not yet. It was as if she didn't know if she was allowed to. He sat down on the couch, staring at her. The marks on her arms glowed faintly, small patterns that pulsed like quiet flames. They weren't just scars, they looked alive, like something branded into her body with purpose. Daniel wanted to ask, but something in her eyes warned him not to. Minutes passed. The clock ticked. On the wall, the rain drummed harder against the glass. Daniel almost convinced himself that maybe she had just wandered in, that she was no threat. But then he heard it, distant footsteps echoing in the street outside, slow and deliberate. He froze. His instincts told him those steps weren't human. The girl noticed too. Her eyes sharpened, her body tensed. She didn't look at Daniel, but her hand gripped the edge of the chair tightly. Daniel swallowed hard, moving closer to the window, pulling the curtain slightly. Out there, through the sheets of rain, he saw shapes, tall and dark, moving with purpose. Their heads glowed faintly under the streetlights, scanning, searching. He let the curtain fall quickly, his chest heavy. Whoever those people were, they were hunting her. He turned back and she was already watching him. Her eyes asked the question she could not say aloud. Would he hand her over? Would he push her back out into the storm? Daniel's throat felt dry. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't a hero. He was just a janitor who spent his nights mopping halls no one cared about. But now someone's life sat in his chair, silent, waiting. He shook his head slowly. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Don't move." The girl lowered her eyes. She nodded once, small and controlled. Her fingers relaxed, but she remained perfectly. Still, the footsteps outside grew softer, then faded. For now, they had passed. Daniel let out a shaky breath. His hands were damp with sweat. He didn't want this. He didn't ask for this. But at the same time, something deep inside told him he couldn't turn her away. He grabbed the blanket and placed it gently over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then pulled it tight around her small frame. For the first time, her eyes softened, the hard fear fading into something else, something fragile. Daniel sat back, rubbing his temples. "What am I even doing?" he muttered. The girl tilted her head as if trying to understand his words. He gave a weak laugh. "Don't mind me," he said. "I talk too much sometimes." She blinked slowly, then looked away. Her silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with all the things she wanted to say but couldn't. Hours passed like that. Daniel dozing off on the couch, the storm still raging, and the girl sitting quietly, unmoving. When he woke to the faint light of morning, she was still there, still silent. Her eyes closed now, but her body upright, as if she didn't dare to truly rest. Daniel sighed. His life had changed in a single night. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew one thing. The world outside was not safe for her, and somehow, without meaning to, he had chosen to stand between her and it. When the girl finally opened her eyes again, she whispered the same words, her voice softer now. Like a Valkyrie, "I can serve, I can stay, I can be silent." Daniel looked at her, shaking his head slowly. "You don't have to prove anything here," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. She blinked at him, her glowing eyes widening slightly as if his words were something she had never heard before. For the first time, Daniel realized that silence could be louder than words, and in that silence, a bond was beginning to form, fragile, unspoken, but real. The rain had slowed by the next evening. Leaving the city wrapped in a damp silence, Daniel had gone through his day like a ghost, cleaning empty classrooms and polishing cold floors. His mind, however, stayed locked on the strange guest in his apartment. Every step of his mop reminded him of her glowing eyes, her trembling whisper, her scars. When he finally returned home, the apartment felt heavier. The girl was still there, sitting exactly where he had left her. She hadn't touched anything in the room, not the old books on the shelf, not the flickering lamp, not even the food he had left on the table that morning. It was as if she didn't want to leave a single trace of her presence. Daniel set down his bag, rubbing his tired shoulders. "You didn't move all day," he said softly. The girl raised her head, her eyes studied him, then shifted to the plate of food, untouched and cold. Daniel frowned. He walked over, grabbed a piece of bread and pushed it toward her. "You need to eat," he said. "Whatever you're running from, you won't survive if you starve." She hesitated, then took it. She ate slowly, almost carefully, as though each bite might be her last. Daniel sat across from her, watching the faint light of her glowing marks. They pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You should tell me your name." For a long time she said nothing. Then, at last, her lips parted. "Lyra," she whispered. Her voice cracked, like the name itself was heavy with chains. Daniel repeated it quietly. "Lyra." The sound lingered in the air, softer than the storm outside. "All right, Lyra. You don't have to explain everything, but I need to know. What are those marks on you?" Lyra's hands moved to cover her arms. Her shoulders trembled. She looked away, her silence stretched on. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but steady. "If I'm risking myself by letting you stay, you need to trust me a little." Her glowing eyes flicked back to his, sharp and uncertain. Then she drew in a slow breath. "They put them on me," she said. Her words were short, broken. "So I obey, so I stay silent, so I serve." Daniel's chest tightened. He had guessed something like this, but hearing it from her mouth was different. It was cruel, worse than he imagined. "Who are they?" he asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Hunters, masters, owners, I was property." The word stung as it left her lips. Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling in his stomach. Lyra looked down. "I ran," she said. "I was not supposed to run. They will find me. They always find." Her hand touched the faint scars glowing across her collarbone. The marks called to them. Daniel understood then. The figures outside in the storm weren't random patrols. They were tracking her, following the invisible signal carved into her very body. He felt a chill run down his spine. His small apartment suddenly seemed too fragile, too open. But when he looked at her again, he didn't see danger. He saw someone broken but still breathing, someone who had chosen freedom even though it meant being hunted. And he knew he couldn't send her away. "You're safe here," Daniel said firmly. His voice surprised even himself. Lyra's eyes widened like she had never heard those words before. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence stretched between them again, heavy but meaningful. That night, Daniel barely slept. He sat near the window, listening for footsteps, watching for shadows. Every creak in the hallway made his muscles tense. Outside, the neon lights flickered across the rain-washed streets. The world seemed quiet, but he knew quiet could break in an instant. Lyra, wrapped in the blanket, finally allowed herself to rest. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Daniel watched her for a moment, her silver skin glowing faintly under the lamplight. He thought about how the academy students laughed at him, how they never even noticed the man who cleaned their halls. And now here he was, guarding someone who needed him more than anyone else ever had. As the hours passed, Daniel realized the truth. His life had been empty for years, silent and unnoticed. Now that silence was broken by a single knock, a single whisper, and though danger pressed close, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. When dawn broke, the city was gray and damp. Daniel stood by the window. Exhaustion. Pulling at his eyes, Lyra stirred. Her glowing eyes meeting his. For the first time, she spoke without being asked. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than chains. Daniel nodded. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You just have to stay alive." She lowered her gaze, but for the faintest second, a fragile hope touched her face, and Daniel knew, no matter what came next, he could not turn back. He had stepped into her world, and she had stepped into his. Secrets had been revealed, and with them his quiet life was gone forever. The city never truly slept. Even when the streets were empty, the hum of neon and the distant whir of drones filled the night. Daniel sat near the window, his arms crossed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He had tried to rest, but his ears stayed sharp, listening for every sound. Lyra sat on the floor, wrapped in the old blanket. Her glowing marks pulsed faintly under the fabric, like hidden fire waiting to be seen. She had said little since sharing her name, but Daniel could feel the weight of her fear in the way she sat close to the wall, ready to flee at any moment. The knock came again, but this one was not soft. It was sharp, heavy, and confident, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his chest. He turned to Lyra, who was already trembling, her glowing eyes wide with terror. "Don't move," Daniel whispered. He quickly moved to the light switch, turning it off. The room dropped into shadow, only the faint city glow leaking through the window. The knock came again, louder, followed by a metallic voice. "Unit 3B, open for inspection." Daniel's heart pounded. He had lived here for years, and no one had ever inspected his apartment. He knew at once this was not random. They were here for her. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, whispering something in her own language, soft and broken. Daniel looked around. His tools from work lay in the corner. Mops, buckets, a heavy wrench, none of them weapons, but they were all he had. The door rattled. A hiss of air as something scanned the lock. Daniel acted quickly, grabbing Lyra's hand. Her skin was cold, trembling. He pulled her toward the back, down the narrow steps leading to the basement storage. The lock above clicked. The door opened. Heavy boots stepped inside. Daniel pushed Lyra into the basement, whispering, "Stay down, stay silent." He closed the basement door gently, leaving only a thin crack to watch through. From above came the sound of metal feet and muffled voices. They were not human, at least not entirely. Their movements were too sharp, too precise. Daniel caught a glimpse through the crack. Figures. In black armor, tall, their helmets glowing faintly as they scanned the room. One of them spoke, its voice cold. "Target signal weak but present. She is here." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed the heavy wrench, his hand slick. With sweat, he was no soldier, no fighter. But he knew if they found the basement, Lyra was finished. The hunters moved through the room, scanning walls, tearing open drawers. One of them stopped near the table, picking up the uneaten bread from yesterday. Its head turned slowly, mechanical, lenses adjusting. Fresh human activity, secondary life form probable. Another replied, "Begin lower search." Daniel's chest tightened. They were coming closer. The sound of their steps echoed, metal on tile. He looked back at Lyra through the crack. She crouched in the shadows, clutching the blanket tight, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Something in that look gave him courage. He could not let them reach her. When the first hunter reached the basement door, Daniel acted. He swung the wrench hard against the metal handle, sparks flying as the door jammed. The sudden noise made the hunter recoil, mechanical voice hissing. Resistance detected. Daniel didn't wait. He swung again, shouting to make noise to draw them away. The hunters turned, their glowing helmets locking onto him. Daniel ran toward the far side of the apartment. His heart slamming against his ribs, energy beams cut through the air, scorching the wall where he had stood. He ducked behind the couch, the smell of burnt fabric filling the room. He had no plan, only desperation. But it worked. For now, their attention was on him, not the basement. From below, Lyra covered her mouth to stop a cry. She wanted to move, to help, but she knew if she revealed herself, it would end. She pressed deeper into the shadows, whispering prayers in a tongue. Daniel did not understand. Daniel gripped the wrench tighter, his arms shaking. He wasn't strong, wasn't trained, but he had spent years cleaning messes, fixing broken things and surviving long nights alone. Now, for the first time, he was fighting, not for himself, but for someone else. The hunters advanced, scanning every move. One spoke again. Human. Interference irrelevant, eliminate. Daniel's breath hitched. He looked toward the basement door one last time, and in that moment, he understood. He could not win by force, but he could buy time. He could keep them away from her, even if it meant risking everything. The storm outside roared again, thunder shaking the windows. The hunters raised their weapons, light glowing at their tips. Daniel lifted the wrench like a shield, his teeth clenched, and in that moment, in the silence before the strike, Daniel realized the truth. He was no longer invisible, no longer just a janitor. He was standing in the doorway of something greater, and the hunters had just arrived. The night stretched on like an endless battle. Daniel's chest still heaved from the chase. The hunters had stormed through his apartment, tearing apart furniture, breaking open cupboards, but by some miracle, they had not found the basement door. Daniel had used every trick he knew. Loud footsteps in the hall, slamming an old window shut, tossing a bucket down the stairwell. Just enough noise to send them searching in the wrong places. When the armored figures finally left, their heavy boots clanging down the street, the silence that followed was worse than the storm itself. Daniel collapsed against the wall, sweat soaking his shirt. His hands shook as he held the wrench, the metal now dented and bent. The basement door creaked open. Lyra stepped out slowly. Her glowing eyes shimmered in the dim light. She looked at him as if seeing something new. Not just a human janitor, but someone who had stood against hunters for her sake. "You fought," she whispered. Her voice carried both disbelief and wonder. Daniel gave a weak laugh. "I ran mostly," he said. "But it worked, didn't it?" She tilted her head, her face still pale. "They will return. They always return." Daniel knew she was right. He looked around the ruined apartment, the broken furniture, the scorch marks from energy blasts. His home was no longer safe. If he kept her here, they would both be caught. He straightened slowly, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Then we don't wait for them to come back. We leave." Lyra blinked, confusion flashing in her glowing eyes. "Leave where?" Daniel thought quickly. The city was wide, full of shadows and corners, but the hunters had ways of tracking. He remembered her words, the marks called to them. If she carried a beacon on her skin, no place inside the city would be safe. Still, running was better than waiting. "Out of here," he said. "Somewhere they won't expect. We'll figure it out as we go." For a moment, Lyra's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but then she closed them again. Her silence was not the silence of obedience anymore. It was the silence of trust. She nodded once. Daniel gathered what little he had, an old backpack, a few tools, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of water. He also grabbed a torn jacket. He handed it to Lyra. "Wear this. It'll hide the marks, at least for a while." She slipped it on, the sleeves hanging loose over her small frame. She looked almost human now, at least in the shadows, but her glowing eyes still gave her away. Daniel rummaged through a drawer and found a pair of broken sunglasses. He handed them to her. "Here, put these on." When she did, something shifted. For the first time, she looked less like prey and more like someone who could vanish into a crowd. They slipped out of the apartment into the wet streets. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the weight of rain. Neon lights reflected on puddles, broken by their hurried steps. Daniel kept his head low, leading her through alleys he had cleaned years ago. He knew the city like he knew the academy halls, every shortcut, every back stairwell, every forgotten corner. Lyra walked close behind him, her steps light, almost silent. She did not complain, did not ask where they were going. Daniel noticed that every time a drone buzzed overhead, she flinched, gripping the jacket tighter. The hunters had scarred her deeply. They stopped at an abandoned station, its walls cracked, its lights dead. Here, Daniel finally allowed them to rest. He sat on a broken bench, breathing hard. Lyra sat across from him, her glowing eyes hidden behind the sunglasses. "Why me?" Daniel finally asked. His voice was low, heavy with the question that had burned inside him since the first knock. "Of all the doors you could have chosen, why mine?" Lyra lowered her head. For a long time she said nothing. Then her voice came, soft but steady. "Because you were the only one who opened." The word struck him harder than any weapon. Daniel stared at her, realizing the truth. He hadn't been chosen by chance. He had been chosen because he did what no one else would have. He listened, he let her in. The sound of distant boots broke the silence. Daniel tensed, peering into the dark tunnels. Shadows moved. The hunters were still close. "We keep moving," he whispered, standing quickly. Lyra rose without a word, her blanket dragging slightly across the floor. Together they slipped back, into the night. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't just cleaning up after others. He wasn't invisible. He was part of something larger, dangerous, and real. His life was no longer about surviving one shift to the next. It was about keeping her alive, about defying the hunters, and though fear pressed on his chest, Daniel felt something else too, hope, fragile but alive, like the first light after a storm. The city lights faded behind them as Daniel led Lyra deeper into the forgotten parts of the city. Here the streets were narrow, the lamps broken, and the air smelled of rust and damp stone. Few people came here anymore, which made it safer, but also more dangerous. If the hunters cornered them, here no one would hear, no one would help. Daniel's boots splashed quietly in shallow puddles. His eyes scanned every shadow, every rooftop. He kept his body slightly ahead of Lyra, like a shield. She followed silently, her small frame wrapped in the oversized jacket. Her glowing eyes, still hidden behind cracked sunglasses, she said nothing, but her silence was not empty. Daniel could feel her trust pressing against him, heavy and real. They stopped at an abandoned warehouse, the windows shattered, the doors half broken. Daniel pushed them open with a grunt and guided her inside. The place smelled of old wood and dust. A few beams of moonlight cut through the broken roof, casting long shadows across the floor. "Here," Daniel whispered. "We'll rest for a while?" Lyra nodded, sitting on the ground near a pile of broken crates. She pulled the blanket tighter, her body trembling though the air was not cold. Daniel sat across from her, dropping his backpack with a sigh. His hands ached from gripping the wrench all night. His muscles sore, but his mind refused to rest. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "You trust me, don't you?" Lyra lifted her head, her glowing eyes meeting his through the dark. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "Yes." The word was soft, but it filled the space between them. Daniel swallowed. He had never been anyone important, never been someone others relied on. Yet here was someone who had been broken by cruelty, giving him her trust. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why put your life in my hands? I'm no soldier. I'm just a janitor." Lyra's lips parted. She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Because you see me." Daniel froze. He didn't know what to say. All his life, people had looked past him, through him, treating him as invisible. Now this alien girl, hunted and scarred, said the one thing no one ever had. Before he could reply, a sound broke the silence. Metal clanging faintly in the distance, Daniel tensed. He rose quickly, moving to the window. Outside, shadows shifted under the moonlight. The hunters were still searching, their glowing helmets moving like cold stars across the dark alleys. "They're close," Daniel whispered. He turned back to her. "We can't stay long." Lyra stood, her body tense, her voice trembled. They will not stop, they never stop. If you stay with me, you will die. Daniel shook his head, gripping the wrench tighter. If I leave you, you'll die. That's not an option. Her glowing eyes softened. She stepped closer. Her voice was barely a breath. You risk everything for me. Why? Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to say he didn't know, that he was being foolish, but the truth rose in his chest, heavy and undeniable. Because no one deserves to be treated like property. Because someone has to stand up. And if that someone has to be me, then fine. Lyra stared at him, her lips trembling. For a moment, the fear in her eyes faded, replaced by something else. Hope. The hunter's steps echoed louder now. Daniel quickly pulled her toward the back of the warehouse. They slipped through a broken door into the shadows. Daniel guided her down a hidden stairwell that led to an old underground passage. The air was damp, the walls cracked, but it was cover. They walked in silence through the tunnel, only the sound of dripping water following them. Daniel's flashlight flickered weakly, casting shaky light across the stone. He glanced at Lyra. Her face glowed faintly under the dim light. She looked fragile yet strong. Every step she took was an act of defiance against those who wanted her chained. Halfway through the tunnel, she spoke again, her voice stronger than before. Daniel, she said. Using his name for the first time, he turned, surprised. She continued, If I fall, do not stop, keep running. Daniel shook his head firmly. Not happening. You don't understand, she said. The marks, they can call to the hunters. Even now, I am a beacon. I will only slow you down. Daniel stopped walking. He looked at her, his jaw tight. Listen to me, I don't care what they put on you. You are not a beacon. You are not property. You are not a burden. You are Lyra, and I will not leave you. The silence that followed was deep. Lyra's eyes shimmered with tears she didn't let fall. She gave a small nod, and for the first time, she whispered, Then I will trust you in the dark. Daniel turned back, leading her forward, his grip on the flashlight firm, his other hand ready on the wrench. The tunnel stretched ahead like an endless night. But something inside him had shifted. He was no longer walking alone. And for the first time, Lyra was no longer running alone. The tunnel carried them far from the warehouse, the air heavy with damp stone and echoes of dripping water. Daniel's legs burned with each step, but he kept moving, holding the flashlight steady. Behind him, Lyra walked in silence, her breathing uneven, yet her steps never faltered. When they finally reached the end of the passage, Daniel pushed open a rusted grate. Cool night air rushed in, filled with the scent of wet earth and fading rain. They climbed out into the open, finding themselves near the edge of the city where old factories stood like skeletons against the sky. Daniel scanned the horizon. The neon glow of the city loomed behind them, while ahead stretched hills cloaked in mist. We're close, he said quietly. If we can get past those hills, they'll have a harder time tracking us. Lyra lifted her head. Her glowing eyes reflected the faint moonlight. They will come, she whispered. They always come. Daniel gripped the wrench at his side. Then we'll face them, he said. His voice was rough but steady. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to fight. They crossed the open ground carefully, the damp grass crunching under their boots. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe they might escape without another chase. But then, he heard it. The faint hum of engines, the metallic echo of boots. The hunters, dark shapes emerged from the fog, their glowing helmets slicing through the mist. Energy weapons hummed in their hands. Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled Lyra behind an old wall, his heart pounding. They're here, he whispered. Lyra's body trembled beside him. Her voice was almost too soft to hear. I cannot run anymore. Daniel turned sharply. Don't say that. You've come this far, you're not stopping now. But Lyra shook her head. The marks, they are calling louder. I can feel it. They will not stop until I am theirs again. Daniel's jaw tightened. He placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes burned. With defiance, then we break the chain. Before she could answer, the hunters closed in. Their cold voices echoed. Target confirmed, eliminate human interference, recover asset. Daniel stood, stepping out from behind the wall. His wrench glinted under the pale moonlight. He knew he was outmatched, but he also knew one truth. They would have to go through him first. The first shot came, slicing the air with blinding light. Daniel dove, rolling across the wet ground. He swung the wrench into the nearest hunters. Knee joint sparks flew as the machine-like figure stumbled. "Run, Lyra!" Daniel shouted. But instead of running, Lyra's body began to glow. The marks across her arms and chest burned brighter, pulsing with fierce light. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "I am not property." The glow spread across her skin, forming patterns of light like living fire. The hunters turned their weapons on her, but before they could strike, a wave of energy burst from her body, slamming into them like a storm. Daniel shielded his eyes. The ground shook. The fog lit up with blinding flashes. When the light faded, the hunters lay scattered, their armor sparking, their weapons shattered. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her body trembling. Daniel rushed to her side, dropping the wrench. "Lyra, hey, stay with me," he said, panic in his voice. She looked up at him, tears glistening in her glowing eyes. "I broke the chain," she whispered. "I am free." Daniel pulled her close, holding her as the last sparks died in the grass around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The night was quiet again. The hunters defeated. The storm finally gone. When dawn came, the horizon glowed with soft light. The mist lifted, revealing hills painted in gold. Daniel stood with Lyra at his side. Her marks still glowed faintly, but now they pulsed with warmth instead of pain. She turned to him, her voice fragile but filled with hope. "I can stay," she whispered. Her words no longer sounded like submission. They sounded like choice, like freedom. Daniel smiled, the weight of exhaustion heavy on his shoulders. "Then stay," he said simply. Together, they walked toward the hills, leaving the broken city behind. For the first time in years, Daniel felt alive, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt free. A new dawn rose above them, and with it, a new beginning.